you all for coming, and I'm delighted to be back in Lahore, one of my favorite cities globally, and my favorite school and good friends. So I'm really delighted to be back here. So today I'm going to be talking to you about a glass half full. That's my view on life. It's my view on regional trade in South Asia, because I think there are tremendous opportunities. And you can ask me why a glass half full, but I think my presentation will tell you why I think it's half full. So imagine a one South Asia, right? So a South Asia where one can travel seamlessly. Many people much more famous than I have used this metaphor. Breakfast in Kabul, lunch in Lahore, tea in Delhi, dinner in Dhaka. Technically this is entirely possible. There is absolutely no reason why we can't do this. And this picture you see before you was a Pakistani lady who was one of the winners of our One South Asia photographic competition. And she actually made 8 cuisines of all the 8 countries of South Asia herself, and then took a picture of all those 8 cuisines. So we were fascinated and actually quite inspired that she did this. So we put it on our, it was one of the winners of our photo contest. So a South Asia can travel seamlessly, enabled by frequent connections. The connectivity, those who travel from South Asian capitals to one another know how onerous it is to travel. Turab conducts this South Asia Economic Students Meet. Some of you may be familiar with it. And we know how difficult it is to get to South Asian countries. So much easier to conduct a conference in Bangkok or in Dubai or even Singapore vis-a-vis doing it in a South Asian city. How bad the connections are. But again, connectivity also means, all those of you who work on trade would know, one of the primary reasons why we trade is to enhance welfare of the people, right? Bottom line of trade is consumption of the people, whatever way, and whether it is through domestic production or through trade. Now, if trade was relatively unencumbered, there were few hassles and few barriers, then there should be very little differences in prices of homogeneous products. Like, we picked up eggs and potatoes. Look at the difference in prices, 50 cents between Kathmandu and Delhi and Islamabad on 12 eggs, right? So the people of Kathmandu suffer for whatever reason. There are many barriers, and that's what we'll be talking about. But broad point is there is a lot of variation in prices in South Asia, which is much less far-flung than ASEAN, which is spread across a much bigger physical territory, and yet the coefficient of variation in prices is much lower in ASEAN. So what's the story of South Asia? We know now it's the most dynamic region in the world. It's been growing faster than any other region for the last 3 or 4 years. And it also has youngsters like all of you. It dominates the population of South Asia, unlike any other region. Again, that's very strong for dynamism and for the future. And yet, it's also the most disconnected, disjointed region in the world. People talk about this figure, but you look at trade as a share of regional GDP, so you're normalizing for GDP, it's less than 1% in South Asia. So the bottom line, earlier it was the top line, here it's the bottom line of trade as a share of regional GDP. So we start with the missing potential in South Asia. So again, neighbors, trade and prosper globally. Think of the most prosperous regions in the world. What comes to mind? Anybody? And
East Asia.
East Asia. Right. The 3 regions which would be the most prosperous. What's the common characteristic? They trade heavily with each other, right? Canada is US largest trading partner. EU 65% intra-regional trade. ASEAN is 25%. If we include East Asia and the Pacific, it's 50%. And South Asia, we are lagging at less than 5%. It's almost like inexorable. It's there. It hasn't changed. It just goes up and down marginally. And importantly, this is something I think Turab and Nazish and others have also done recently. Intra-regional trade is only 1/3 of its potential, and I believe this is a major underestimate. So current trade in goods only in South Asia is about $23 billion. The potential which we've established through augmented gravity model is 3 times that number, 67 billion. This is only in goods, and this is not a dynamic model. So even the goods trade could be much higher, and this doesn't include services. So some other work which my colleague has shown me on services shows also there is similar potential in services, probably even more. Pakistan, since we are here in Lahore, Pakistan can increase its trade. This is figures for Pakistan are probably the most mind-boggling in that gap. So Pakistan is the most, out of all the South Asian countries, it has the largest unmet gap in trade. Right? So it can increase its trade with South Asia eightfold, right? From about 5 billion to almost 40 billion. And this includes both exports and imports to South Asia are below potential. And of course, the largest share of this is India. So very interestingly, because everybody in Pakistan complains about trade deficits, right? And we can talk later about why that's not a good economic concept to talk about, at least, especially bilateral trade deficits. But it should reassure those who think about bilateral trade deficits that in our gravity model, we are seeing almost similar 19 to 20 billion exports from Pakistan to India, and 19 to 20 billion exports from India to Pakistan as the potential from the gravity model. Right? So there is tremendous unmet potential there. Again, intra-regional investment, which is also very low. So it's even more depressing than trade. About countries, especially India, invests a lot globally, 10 to 15 billion dollars overseas every year. Very little comes to South Asia and almost zero to Pakistan. Right? So total intra-regional investment as a share of outward investment is about 1% in South Asia. So, and we know, those of you again who study trade and value chains will know the intimate connectivity between trade and investment. Right? So again, so this is reinforcing the lack of trade and investment reinforce each other in South Asia. Now let's talk about barriers and what ails. We all have our favorite themes, but they are recurring themes about how both nature and especially man have contrived to fragment the region. There are isolated regions, the landlocked region, mountainous regions, but the main problems in South Asia have to do with tariffs, trade costs, complications in standards, non-tariff measures, FDI, and then additionally over and above all of this is barriers to trade between India and Pakistan, which are the two largest economies. And then underlying theme in all of this is lack of mutual trust, and this is something that I will return to. This is something, discrimination of South Asian countries against each other. We've established this, I think, perhaps this evidence may have come out for the first time, based on a trade restrictiveness index. We find that country after country in South Asia, we have data for 5 countries. So barring Afghanistan, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal and Pakistan, all treat trade from the rest of the world better than they treat trade from South Asia. So just think about that, right? We used to think, oh, it's just that we don't give each other preference. It's actually worse than that. So India's trade OTRI with the rest of the world is 0.5. With South Asia, it's 4.5. So 9 times worse, right? Same in case of Sri Lanka, Pakistan, it's 6 times worse, this trade restrictiveness index. So this is something to keep at the back of our minds and say, obviously there is stuff going on. This is based on, again, gravity type modeling. And negate the benefits of proximity. Do you think India and Pakistan are neighbors? They're neighbors, right, physically? Yeah. But in trading terms, Pakistan, for as far as Pakistan is concerned, India could be in the North Pole. That's what our trading data tells us. Right? So it's cheaper for India to trade with Brazil than to trade with Pakistan. It's cheaper for Bangladesh to trade with Brazil than for Bangladesh to trade with Nepal. And you know the map. So it's mind-boggling, these statistics. These are, again, based on trade data, what they reveal. So what do we do in the report? We went through we worked very hard. And we wanted to come up with data, with evidence that could be as foolproof as is possible in economics. And so we brought in new data, we did a lot of surveys, we talked to a lot of people who on the ground, and then we worked on 4 different areas. And we'll go through each of those in turn. 4 critical barriers, and we chose these for different reasons. Two of these barriers we chose because of the glass half full. We chose because there were good things going on in South Asia in two of these areas. And the other two are traditional, the tariffs and non-tariff barriers. So I'll go into each of these briefly. So again, trade economists know first area is tariffs. So import tariffs, they are a tax on imports. Yes, we know that, but they are also tax on exports. Equally again, I'm sure you know this. We can talk about in Q&As if you want more. But exporters feel the pinch when imports are taxed. South Asia's tariffs are more restrictive than any other region in the world. They double the average, and this is just pure reported tariffs that are reported to the WTO. But wait for it. This is something you must have heard about it. They are creatures called para-tariffs. South Asian countries are very inventive in levying tariffs, so they call them all sorts of names, and then they don't have to report to the WTO. They are very non-transparent. Pakistan, you call them regulatory duties. Sri Lanka calls them. There are 6 different para-tariffs in Sri Lanka: ports levy, commodity levy, regulatory duties in Bangladesh, and so on. So, if you actually include para-tariffs, protective para-tariffs, in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, the reported tariff doubles. Right? So, this is the extent to which it is prevalent. In Pakistan, the quantitative figures are not that high, but it is massively used, and it undermines the goal of transparency in trade. So, it's a very poor, it's a significant problem even in Pakistan, the issue of para-tariffs. So, and by the way, these para-tariffs, these are not included in trade agreements. Right? This is something we discovered people hadn't been talking about. So we highlighted this in our report. So when you have a SAFTA, South Asia Free Trade Agreement, when you put things on the table, say, okay, we are giving these 100 products 0 tariff. Hang on, but we didn't include, that 7% regulatory duty. It's not even on the table, right? So it's not a surprise that SAFTA doesn't work because these para-tariffs are not even on the table. Secondly, there are long sensitive lists. What do we mean by sensitive lists? These are products that are not given trade concessions, right? So what is South Asia Free Trade Area? What does it connote to you? It means free trade, right? Ideally zero trade, zero duty trade. More than a third of products in South Asia do not enjoy tariff concessions from each other. Right? So again, this is almost by design. So SAFTA, it's only in name. It doesn't work. It's a so-called free trade agreement, right? It's undermined by para-tariff sensitive lists and several other things. So look at the example of Pakistan. When it exports to South Asia, 39% of its exports to South Asia do not get concessionary tariffs. They have to face the same regime as the rest of the world. Probably in some cases even worse. And similarly, 1/5 of Pakistan's imports do not get concessionary treatment under SAFTA. Okay, so this is the issue of SAFTA and how can we. So the policy implications are implicit in this, and I'll come back to it at the end. So second area we talk about is non-tariff measures. Globally, countries, the norm has, and South Asia has a huge exception. Tariffs have come down to single-digit levels globally. Some cases 2-3% average tariffs. OECD countries. South Asia is not an honorable exception. It's almost like a shameful exception to this, right? And countries, what do? They substitute tariffs with non-tariff measures in order to provide some protection. But non-tariff measures, I should hasten to add, are legitimate tools of protecting domestic human life, plant life, animal life, right? Major, because you don't want products to be your domestic environment to be contaminated. So you protect. You put in regulations. The same for domestic production, same for import production. Those are legitimate non-tariff measures. Standards, simply put, every country in the world levies non-tariff measures. Right? Singapore, the most efficient free trader in the world, has a non-tariff measure on every single product line. And yet, it is the most efficient clearer of goods in the world. So, you don't equate non-tariff measures with barriers. That's what I'm trying to say. The two are very different. And yet, in South Asia, we have conflated the two. And that's what we try to do in our report. We talked to about 200 exporters and said, okay, what do you actually feel on the ground when you trade, right? So we talked to them and asked them these questions. And we looked at the
ease of meeting the non-tariff measures. So a key question was the procedural obstacles to meeting legitimate non-tariff measures from the importing country. And we focused on a particular kind of non-tariff measures, which sanitary and photosanitary standards and technical barriers to trade. What did we come up with? We found that a large chunk of barriers are not real but perceived. Exporters think they are barriers, traders think they are barriers, but they're actually not. A very large chunk can be traced to information asymmetry. If I'm an importer in India, say, I'm an importer and I'm importing medicinal plants from Nepal. This is a real example I'm giving. They reach the border and they say, oh, and the customs inspector says, where's your best risk analysis certificate? Every card, if I import cardamom, I need that certificate. So the exporter says, oh, sorry, I didn't know that. So then he tries other means to get around. So, you extra legal methods. So is that a non-tariff barrier or is that an information problem? So it's an information asymmetry. It's the duty of, in this case, I would say both India and Nepal to have educated the trader that these are the requirements for exporting this particular product. So information campaigns are very important so that people don't come to the border and come up with, get unpleasant surprises. Oh, I didn't know this. That you should know it. You are in the business of trading. Right? The second perceived non-tariff barrier relates to capacity. If yesterday the example came up in the South Asia Economic Summit, Afghanistan exporter or actually Pakistan textile importer saying, I'm importing cotton from Afghanistan, but they don't have fumigation facilities to test for fumigation or for pests. So I face a lot of problems clearing Afghanistan cotton consignments, and I need them because I'm a textile exporter from Pakistan. This lady is saying, and can you help me ease this flow of cotton from Afghanistan to Pakistan? Well, that's the issue of capacity. Again, not a non-tariff barrier, but the importer feels it like a non-tariff barrier because it takes so much time to clear that consignment, right? But actually, what does it mean? It means that Afghanistan, if it really wants to have smooth clearance, should get certification facilities, and there Pakistan can do a technical assistance, like India is doing for Nepal, for Bangladesh, certifying products, so they can sail smoothly with the proper test certification. What are real barriers? There are real barriers also. Real barriers are if you don't have your two customs agencies talking to each other electronically. Then, if you don't exchange information electronically, I come here and I'm an exporter, I clear my goods here, then I come to you and I have to clear my goods again. Even though ideally I should have a single clearance because that's the modern world, quick, smooth, and I'm already putting my information in advance electronically. Right? So that's not happening in South Asia. And then of course there are, the proverbial, bad eggs, the customs inspectors who are cussed and, will want their, will take long to clear. Right? So that's also a non-tariff barrier. So again, there's no magic wand to solving these issues. That's why, trade is a long, arduous process. It takes time, takes patience. Information flows are necessary, what I mentioned. Infrastructure is needed so that the two portals at customs can talk to each other. And then procedures, capacity building, all of that. And these are sort of baby steps or initial steps towards eventually mutual recognition agreements, which are the sort of in some sense the gold standard, where when you can have that. But so these are all interim steps towards that. The third issue we talked about, and now we come to the two positive examples. So far, it's not all doom and gloom, folks, in South Asia. So we come to the two positive examples in South Asia. We start with connectivity, which is the grease of international trade, nuts and bolts, right? So if when you have the policy side tariffs, this is the physical side, the connectivity. So why did we pick up air connectivity? Because we have a fantastic example in South Asia. So we wanted to learn from it. So regional air connectivity, we know in South Asia is poor. I talked about it. Pakistan and Sri Lanka have a free trade agreement, but they have only 10 flights a week. So how much business are we doing? India and Sri Lanka have a free trade agreement. They have 147 flights a week. So that's the example we picked up, try to understand what is it that they have done that the rest of South Asia can learn from. So why is air travel important? We know, not just for tourism, Trade in goods, high value goods can go through air, both services trade, foreign investment, business need to travel to each other, talk to each other, and then so it impact. And then we focused on 2 episodes of liberalization between India and Sri Lanka. And we established, again, I think we didn't find this in the literature earlier, we've established econometrically that these agreements, these BAZAs, bilateral air service agreements, had a very significant impact on flights per week, capacities, prices on the routes that were traveled, right? So there's no question that the amendment, the 2011 amendment for which we had data before and after, we had a very significant impact on air travel. What happened? The economic impact was very significant. Since 2005, India is the #1 source of tourism in Sri Lanka. Just think about it, right? So, since 2005, the first air services agreement was 2003. Of course, they also liberalized visas to capitalize on that. And then Sri Lankan tourists to India have also not been lagging. They've been growing very steadily since then. So South Asia can learn from this experience, from the India-Sri Lanka experience. And if there are, there will be supporting reforms, of course, needed. But the important point here to remember is that it was Sri Lanka which pursued India doggedly that I want liberalization between us of air travel, because it's in my interest as Sri Lanka to do that, because I have a huge market there, right? So it is in my interest to liberalize, and I get, obviously tourists, but my airlines industry also benefits. And not only did I get bilateral tourism, Sri Lanka actually was able to pick up tourists or travelers from Middle East to Colombo to South Indian cities. So they were even doing that, a lot of that. So it was cheaper for them to offer that. They were competing with Air India and others later on, different airlines, and they were competing successfully. So a solid case study. We went into a lot of depth in this, and there are big examples given the abysmal state of connectivity, air connectivity in South Asia. Big lessons for the region. The fourth area which we tackled, which is not usual in economic reports or in World Bank reports, is the trust deficit. And Kaushik Basu, who wrote our foreword, beautiful foreword, actually, I would recommend you read that. Cross-country studies show that nations in which there's a lot of trust do well economically. In other words, the concept of social capital. And this also holds across countries, right? So, trust, very fragile in South Asia, right? So, whenever you go to seminars on South Asia, trust and, tu me is, it can degenerate unless it is controlled by a stern moderator. The discussions can often degenerate into that. So trust is very fragile, even amongst intellectuals, and forget about, others. So this virtuous circle between trade and trust has been broken. That's the whole point. Remember the gap, 23 billion, 67 billion. So trade has not been allowed to play its role. So more trade means more trust and more people-to-people connect. So that virtuous circle has not really played out in South Asia because there is such a huge gap, right? So what is the positive example that we found here? We found the border huts of Bangladesh, right? So this is a market in which people meet and do petty trade. Once a week in four border locations between India and Bangladesh. They meet and they talk to each other. They do $100 limit on per person trade. 50 vendors, 200 buyers. And I visited myself there physically, one of the locations. It's simply amazing. The kind of vibes that you get there from people. Happiness, families rendered, distant by partition, meeting, hugging, crying, all of that. Because you don't need visas for this, right? Because you come from your respective countries, come to the market, go back, right? It's huge, right? So we looked at 4 border huts, and all of them, this is a survey we did with partners, an unambiguous positive welfare impact on all stakeholders, whether it is sellers, whether it is buyers, whether it is laborers, rickshaw pullers, everybody getting benefited from this. And the security forces also said, great, smuggling has gone down as a result of this. And especially women, we found. We have a beautiful video, if you look at our website, you'll see on a 3-minute video on border huts, which we've talked to a lot of the stakeholders on this. And they're also improving, very important, this is the central thesis and why trust. They are improving cross-border relations. through the people-to-people contact that this kind of petty trade allows. We talk to Indians, we talk to Bangladeshis. They each have a very strongly positive view of each other as a result of the interaction in the borders, in the border huts. So again, the implications are obvious, and I'll come. So how do we get all of this vision that we've propounded? How do we get there? As I said, the 4 areas. Tariffs, liberalizing trade within South Asia, and by the way, what I said holds even for bilateral. We documented the malaise for SAFTA, but it's an equal. Even in bilateral free trade agreements, para-tariffs are not on the table, and there are sensitive risks, right? So whatever we do, free trade agreements, to make them work, you need to address both of these issues. And then, of course, on non-tariff measures, again, I outlined them. So, port restrictions are there, border infrastructure for electronic data interchange, partner country standards. Work on those. Accelerate connectivity agenda. There's air connectivity, we follow the Sri Lankan example. And then improving land connectivity with neighbors. There is more trade between India and Pakistan via Dubai than directly across the Wagah border or via Karachi because of restrictions, right? So think about how inefficient that trade would be. And that trade is about 3 times the officially recorded numbers, about 2 billion. And then finally, taking new initiatives, and I cannot stress this enough, to enhance people-to-people contact via trade. So for Pakistan, we're suggesting could be their pilot border huts between India, Pakistan, and between Afghanistan, Pakistan. You need trust, definitely, between these relationships. Let's start in this small way through border huts. Can it be possible? And then tourism. Tourism is a prime force for people-to-people connect and generating that trust. With education tourism, cultural tourism, religious tourism, Kartarpur, very welcome exchange there, and then medical and all of that, P2P contact. And your head of the department runs a beautiful, along with other professors in South Asia, runs SISM, South Asia Economic Students. I'm an unabashed admirer of that effort and of all the professors who run that. It's a labor of love. It's an investment for the future. That's why also I'm talking to you, because I'm investing. I want you to go home with these positive messages and not negativity. And that's why I make it a point to come back here again and go to universities. Because, I think that's the future, and, the more we have youngsters, of course, it should be the people-to-people should be at all levels. But you hopefully are not encumbered by the baggages of partition, so you will be able to make better strides. So finally, context for Pakistan and South Asia is very clear. I want to put this in a bit of an international context. Country after country in South Asia faces export problems, competitiveness issues. We know, you read the papers, you know that, right? It's not just Pakistan. There are many countries face these issues of exporting, diversification, where it's coming from. At the same time, there is the world, we know, you read the headlines, there are all kinds of trade frictions, in the developed world vis-a-vis China and the rest of the world as well. It's not just China. There is between EU and North America and so on. Every country, developed country, is particularly going through this. So, and yet, South Asia is at your doorstep. Huge unrealized opportunities, the fastest growing region in the world, the youngest region in the world. Put the 2 and 2 together, right? I'm not saying that this is the only opportunity. Of course, global trade is the most efficient. WTO trade, most favored nation, that's the most efficient. But that's not where the world is. World is going through regional trade agreements. So exploit the opportunities that are here at the doorstep, for God's sake. Why not? Because it's welfare enhancing, right? And what we are saying is, and in the context of what Nazish mentioned that Turab did about trust, I'm hoping that, again, at least I'm espousing that, can trade reverse that? So instead of politics trumping trade, can trade lead the charge, right? So can we unlock the link between trade, connectivity and trust, as I talked about in the border hut experiment? Right? So can trade be allowed to play its role as it did in the European Union? Germany and France were sworn enemies, right? Pre-World War, and yet now they are part of the European Union, right? Through starting with an economic experiment, the European Coal and Steel Community. That's how it started, led to the formation of the European Community and the European Union. So So I'm a trade, I'm a trade wala, and I want to make sure that we let trade play its role. Right? So obviously, when we do that, the trade liberalization, we can manage reforms. There will be sensitive sectors, you can backload. There are many solutions, as long as we start the discussions, serious discussions about, trade leading maturity. So, my young friends, thank you for this opportunity to talk to you. South Asia it's a glass half full, it's a work in progress, right? Nirvana is very, very far away, right? But the way forward in South Asia is incremental steps, baby steps. So you don't, build on small victories, and then increase their, in scope and magnitude and ambition. Let's start on that Kartarpur type things, border hard types of things, air connectivity types of things. Let's keep at it, and of course we need a healthy dose of optimism to work on South Asia. And as you would have guessed, I do have that healthy dose of optimism. So thank you.